Americans for Safe Access is celebrating our 23rd anniversary. For over 2 decades, we've brought medical cannabis stakeholders together to meet the immediate needs of patients while addressing knowledge, policy, and regulatory gaps, clearing the way for a national medical cannabis framework that serves all patients. What you may not know is that ASA has been women-led ever since I founded the organization in 2002. So for our 23rd anniversary, I've created this series where I've interviewed women who have taught me everything I know about medical cannabis. My next guest has had one of the most modern journeys in cannabis, a graduate degree specializing in cannabis, and went straight from college to work for a cannabis regulator. And she has also, during this journey, maintained a commitment to this plant and to this medicine. So I can't wait for you all to meet Nyomi. Hi, Naomi. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. I'm so excited to have you in this little space I've created. I've been having a lot of fun connecting with all these amazing women in this space. So I'm so excited we could find some time in your busy world to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to do it. It was I think I sent in the email. It was an honor to be asked, and I truly mean that.
Well, I'm humbled and honored by all the amazing women I get to work with all the time. So you're in good company.
Good.
First, let's start. Why don't you tell us how you got into cannabis? Like, what brought you in this crazy world?
Sure. Yeah. It's an interesting story. I'm sure everyone's is, but this one was wild. It started in 2020. So prior to my introduction to cannabis, I just was a college kid that had consumed every once in a while, so I had general interest. And my bachelor's while I was in school was in plant and soil sciences, and I was focusing on crop production. And at the time, I was working in a soil testing lab, and so I was helping PhDs and master students conduct their like thesis statements and whatnot, research for their thesis. And I would sit in while they would practice presenting and things like that. And in Oklahoma, so I was at Oklahoma State University. So they were primarily focusing on wheat, soybeans, just plains crops. And at one point, I remember being like, how many times can you research a soybean? So I personally was starting to get to just kind of get a little bit disinterested and was navigating different things. I had planned and had earned a scholarship to build hydroponic systems out in Africa and just kind of work with the people on how to source locally and maintain the products with the resources they had available to them. But that was opportunity was taken away during shutdown. So I was like, okay, well, now I have no idea what I'm going to do this summer. And it was my personal goal to always have a working paid internship through school. And I was lucky to always find that. And it was my last summer uh, being in school. So I was like, okay, I have to like find something. So randomly, our department head sent an email to all of us from a grow facility here in Oklahoma looking for an intern, and they were going to pay them. And I was like, well, I'll try it out. So I interned at a facility here in Oklahoma the summer of 2020. And then that just opened my world up to cannabis, the production of it. At the time, they were having me help them set up their soil testing program. They were an organic cultivator. And so I did my best to bridge the gap for them with Oklahoma State Soil Testing Lab. But as soon as they figured out it was for cannabis, they stopped taking our samples, even though it was just the soil. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so that was kind of my first uh, little inkling of some of the barriers that are set in place for specifically growers at the time. But then I was just super fascinated by the plant in itself, just with the background that I had from OSU. And then I was like, well, this helps people too. How amazing is that? I get to work with all these folks that are growing this wonderful plant that was super interesting, and then it helps people, and I want to learn more about that. So that was the summer before my senior year of college. I just Googled master's programs in medical cannabis, and that's how I found the University of Maryland, Baltimore's medical cannabis sciences and therapeutics program. I went ahead and applied. And then I was accepted. I was really excited about that because, like I said, I did not want to continue learning about soybeans or trying to figure out how to research wheat. And so I was like, this is the next best alternative. So that was kind of my intro to cannabis, and then everything just kind of flourished since. So,
I have to say, it's so amazing to hear journeys like that. When I started Americans for Safe Access in 2002, I started it as a patient. There was there was nothing. Like there was even I found some doctors and some researchers that maybe would help me with we I created the series of flyers that were like cancer and medical cannabis,
mhm.
um, chronic pain, medical cannabis, but I couldn't get any of the doctors and researchers that helped me do the research for those to put their name on it. Right. And so
Okay.
I was like, really? This is going to be like medical information from Steph the activist.
Yeah.
And even my neurologist that brought up medical cannabis to me, he didn't have any information, right? He was just like, I don't know. He's like, it's better than nothing, right? And
Okay.
so to hear that like a journey into cannabis from academia is like to say it's really heartwarming. It's like oh because it really, this is obviously a very complex issue that goes
Mhm.
across. So you and I talk a lot about regulations, but it goes, across chemistry and medicine and societal studies, right? Like it's sort of like a little bit of everything, and
Mhm.
having so many experts come to help. It's like it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting time. I didn't think about how rare of an opportunity it was when it came to me. It wasn't until after the fact when I started telling people that their eyes would get really big and they'd be like, "You're doing what?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, I had an internship, and this is just kind of what happens after you go to college, right?" And so, um, yeah, it was a very unique experience, and I'm grateful for how I was introduced into the space for sure.
Yeah, and I know you're in the regulatory space now. I'm wondering, how have you been able to bring that experience of some of the barriers you saw, right? Having, working with other agricultural products and their exhaustive study of soil versus, cannabis being sort of locked out of that space.
Mm-hmm. So, I entered into working as a state regulator very naive to what state work in general looked like, and then also very naive to the way the industry functioned here in Oklahoma specifically and the politics associated with it. So at first, I was very just entered into it with this idea of like, okay, well, I have all this information to share, so I'm going to start sharing as much of it as I can at one time with whoever I can. So it felt like I was running around the agency as I would hear things pop up, but not necessarily understand the complexity of the issue or what was being discussed, and just kind of throw my thought or idea, or one time when I was working at the dispensary, this happened and I think you should consider that. Or while I was in school, so I started my second semester within the master's program working at the agency. So when I was in school, if there was something cool that I was learning, I'd be like, hey, let me draw what I'm learning right now on this whiteboard so you can see like how cool this thing is and why I can't stop thinking about it. And so that was kind of the origin of my step into sharing my experiences and knowledge at the agency. And it slowly developed into, hey, you know, if you want to educate people, we could kind of formalize it a little bit more. So let's do lunch and learn opportunities so then people can pick and choose if they want to come and hear about what you want to say or not. So you're not like bombarding them during their workday. And then that evolved into me being adopted into our learning and development program. So then it was more formalized education for staff internally. And then eventually just, answering questions during legislative session, like, "Oh, does this make sense? Or do you have any information that would help us understand this?" Or different things like that. So yeah, just kind of making it known that I knew things. And then eventually they were like, "Okay, let's go to Nyomi because she knows things."
Nice, nice. No, it is really important. I think, when you think about, again, on the legal side, right, which, within the work that you'd been doing, it's a science, right? There either is heavy metal in a soil or there isn't, right? Like there's a test, it's right. There's no question about whether or not people are, how they're using that test, there's set standards. But when you get into the world of politics,
Mhm.
there's, truth, and then there's like, I don't know, it's like truthiness. I know it's a Trump administration word, but it's really like how people hear it, right?
Mhm.
Like what, it's more like, does that fact serve me? Right? If
Right.
it doesn't, I'm just not going to talk about it, right? That happens a lot. But for, this very crazy world that we're in of, regulating an illegal substance at the state level, which we always have to appreciate, like how crazy that is,
Yeah.
and all of that pressure that, state legislators can start with an idea of what they want to get to, and then they just have to deal with the reality of politics.
Mhm.
And then, regulators, which I always say, like, bless your hearts, like, you guys have, you don't have power over what it is you're supposed to do, right? That's told to you by the state legislature, usually are
Mhm.
not given a big enough budget to do it. And you are the face to the public and all the other stakeholders to complain about it not working, right? And so
Right.
you're like, uh, but I love what, I love that, your input into that space had them create a learning program for people, for the regulators, because
Mhm.
we found is that a lot of times when these um, offices of cannabis are created in the state house, they're not really sure who to put in it.
Right.
They're like yeah, and it's weird because it's almost like there should be like a changeover, right? There's people that should come and set up the agency, and then it's like a separate skill set for people that are licensing, right? It's like it's a
Mhm.
lot that's there, and so having an internal, constant way to improve their knowledge is just amazing.
Yeah, and I have to say I definitely advocated for that in a very forceful way. I just put, coming out of school, this was my first, what I call like adult real job. So I was like, I really have nothing to lose here. And in my mind, I guess maybe it's coming from academia where it's like, I can write a really good paper and give you all the information, and I don't really know how you're going to ignore the facts presented to you. And so that's kind of just the mindset that I had and how I approach the conversations. If it's like, how can you deny me the opportunity to share this information when you know that I have these stacks to get out? And so, yeah, it was great presenting, being able to present that kind of energy, I guess, and it be received well. In any other place and time, maybe not. But, there was a lot that I had to learn on my own too. There were many times where I had to sit and discuss things with our legal team and just really kind of understand the implications of, you mentioned regulators are the face, right? But we don't determine
Yeah.
necessarily what gets done. So how that can be perceived from the public and the different ways that scrutiny can come. And so they kind of were teaching me how to have that legalese type mind from a regulator standpoint. And that was a major learning curve because I was like, oh, I can say this. And they're like, you can say this way,
Right.
right? And so that in itself was a major learning curve for me because it's like, well, I don't want to take away the integrity of the information, but what is the most appropriate way to do it? So that in itself was like some weird brain exercise um, that had to happen.
Yeah, no, I love that. When I started Americans for Safe Access, I always say, if I, thank God for cocky 25-year-olds, right? Because I really came into the space. I was like, yeah, this is medicine. Let's do this. And I honestly thought that it was going to take like 2 years. Like I thought that we were so close, but if I hadn't felt that way, I don't know if I would have put my everything into it, and I just am so excited, that, not only are there people like yourself, like leaning in and really pushing, that this is done right, but that you have support as well to give you the information you need in that position. It's so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I'm very grateful to everyone that has provided me that education, I guess you could say. Yeah.
I think within the realm of soil, sorry, I'm just like I want to go back to soil. Because I think, it's I've been working with the American Public Health Association about integrating cannabis education into existing public health notices. So where there are already heavy metal, education about consuming heavy metal, is there a way that we can just talk about cannabis, right? There's, like Maine, there's arsenic in the soil. And so there's all of this existing education about, which foods you can water with tap water, et cetera. So within the work that you're doing, I know you're working within the regulatory agency, but you're also working with regulating, I say standard setting bodies. I would say, what has been the big difference you feel like you've had to translate for this cannabis plant into sort of the world of soil and soil testing and education?
It's a good question. So I guess because you're always discussing cannabis as a commodity.
Right.
And I think it's valuable to see it that way too, right? Because if you're wanting to integrate it, talking about soil, then you have to think about it as a commodity crop, right? Because that's how we understand soil is through commodity crops and those interactions. And so it's whenever I start any presentation, if I'm doing a cannabis 101 or talking about the plant, I'm always like, let me bring you all down to earth and like root you all in some basic plant science knowledge. And so for me, it's kind of taking that step back of like, okay, we're talking about this thing, but we need to bring it down to the foundation, to the soil. We need to talk about the soil. We need to understand that relationship that this plant, just the plant, has with the soil. And then we can discuss how the human involvement affects everything after that. Because cannabis itself is not harmful. It's after humans get involved and manipulate it and do all these other things. We were talking about definitions earlier, creating definitions. It's like that is kind of where the harm comes from. And so when you just, I guess I just try to break it down with analogies. Like, let me connect your brain, cannabis. Let's think about tomatoes. Let's think about there's different varieties of tomatoes, right? And then, do you grow at home? Like, so just really bringing it down to that level, like this is a plant. And so I think people, especially within AST, it's a lot of industry folk. And so there is like the financial component attached to that. And so, people have all of these pressures associated with this plant that aren't necessarily because of the plant. Like I mentioned, it's everything else. And so it's like, let's just really ground ourselves. Let's take a moment to separate yourself from these pressures and then allow you to look at this from hopefully a non-biased, like neutral, childlike understanding. So like with the soil stuff, cannabis, it's pretty straightforward. It's a hyperaccumulator. So anything that's in the soil is going to end up in the plant. And then after that happens, it's on you to be responsible for taking care of it, getting rid of it, whatnot. And prior to that as well, if you're developing, your own soil mixes, that's specific to growers. But yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Yeah, I was really
Okay.
curious. It is, I mean, even the word grower versus farmer,
Mm.
is such a big difference, right? And I know in California, worked with like Kristen Navidal. I don't know if you met her. She's actually now in the California regulator. But you know, we were really mindful of using this word farmer and really, you know, connecting people back to that amazing, like one of the oldest professions of civilized society, right? Is are farmers. And you know, by you know, using terminology like grower, it's something it feels like it's different, but really all of the lessons are the same, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
how plants work. But you know, we were also talking earlier about your interest in other herbal medicines, and really, you know, a lot of the people that I've been interviewing, including Michelle Sexton, who taught me this sort of phrase I'm always thinking of, that cannabis will be the gateway of other herbal medicines, that we're really opening up how to integrate cannabis into healthcare, that we're sort of paving the way in this other space. But as someone who, because I've seen your announcements of some of the education you're giving around Oklahoma, and I feel like that cannabis is like a gateway almost to like the human body. Here you were like studying soil, and now you are giving presentations on the endocannabinoid system and how this plant
Yeah.
works on you. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear just a little bit about, as you were studying cannabis, coming from it from an agricultural point of view. When was it like you're like, oh my God, now I have to like I have to understand all of these other like really like you know, high level fields of study.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I was very proud of being a plant scientist because I did not have to study humans, did not have to deal with any of that. So entering into cannabis stomped on that very, very hard and very quickly. So luckily, you know, under like basic science translates, right? So I was grateful to have that science background because then it helped learning these new human processes be easier than if it had not. But yeah, it was definitely a reluctant thing. You know, I applied for a medical cannabis sciences and therapeutics program, and I don't think I thought about the therapeutics piece of it at all. I read through, you know, the course descriptions. They're talking about pharmacognosy, pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm just excited because I'm gonna go get a master's in cannabis. And there was like one elective focused on the plant, sort of. So being in that course was a major, uh, it made me step back and be like, okay, like I know this plant helps people, and I had never thought about how or why it helps people. Now I know. And yeah, it's not something I ever considered myself doing prior to, you know, having to complete an assignment because, you know, I paid for that experience. Um, but yeah, I love the way you said that in Oklahoma it's a gateway to the human body because people, you know, Oklahoma's farming state, there's a lot of other things going on here, but people do understand plants relatively well. But I would say like when you look at the statistics of Oklahoma, we're not doing so hot in a lot of areas. And health is definitely one of the ways that is impacted here. So I think, you know, people want to know things. It feels good to be confident in a fact and opening up to, you know, the way you interact with the outside world affects your body. And cannabis is a part of that. So I like to, whenever I'm giving my presentations, I talk about the endocannabinoid system. I talked about the body piece of it because it's like we have this process in our body already, right? I'm not explaining anything new to you, but when talking to other people, it light bulbs go off and they're like, oh wow, it's so cool. I had no idea. Um, you know, there's potential to be dismissive, but it's like, well, let me connect you back to this plant. Isn't it so wild that when someone consumes this plant, it causes this effect in their body? And, you know, it's not this taboo, scary thing. It's just like a natural physical process that occurs. And so people just need to be safe and mindful about it. And so, yeah, I love that it's a gateway to the human body because that's what it was for me. You know, just as someone that was not interested in the medical field at all. But now talking with doctors, nurses, pharmacists, being able to understand the way they talk about drug products and things of that nature. But I think that also helped open me up to other medicinal plants. And it's not anything new, right? Medicinal plants evolved way before we did. And then humans came around and were like, oh, if we take this, we'll live longer. How cool is that? So what's new is Western medicine, and that has caused more problems than anything. So I think it's really important for us to start learning how to get back to something so um, just like foundational to our existence as humans.
And I think, what's interesting is that all plants have a reaction in our body, right? So,
Mhm.
and so what's interesting, like so many people I've talked to, even through this series, have talked about how for some people, the endocannabinoid system, when they hear that, it's the first time they've actually thought about systems in their body beyond their
Mhm.
heart. They're like, oh. And sometimes maybe they're just learning about it to have an excuse to tell their wife why they're using cannabis, like whatever reason. They're like, whoa, this is there's a chemical reaction, right? That actually food, everything you consume is our
Mhm.
lives with plants. But one thing I've noticed in educating regulators and state legislators about contaminants around
Mhm.
cannabis, or educating doctors about the endocannabinoid system is just the absence of nutrition education in our society. And so
Mhm.
plants, like the agricultural industry and medicine, are not in touch, right? That they've actually gone
Right.
separate studies. So whenever I talk to state officials about parts per billion, right, of a microbial, I always make sure that I show them like, and this is why it's important. So,
Mhm.
presence of aspergillus in someone who has had an organ transplant could actually cause organ failure, right? Like a rejection of
Mhm.
the organ, right? And so really taking that points per billion and connecting it. And what's interesting is, and maybe I haven't really thought of it this way until talking to you just now, is that um, they're not thinking about that about food. That's not like it should be like cannabis should
Mhm.
just be another plant that humans are using that we
Mhm.
could just simply translate. But in a way, we're having to, it's hard to teach doctors or medical professionals about the endocannabinoid system because nutrition isn't taught in pre-med.
Right.
Like, how can you understand this system that affects everything if you don't know how
Yeah.
how that piece works? So
Yeah.
it's so exciting to
That's
see cannabis sort of connect those dots, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. And then, the whole point, like your point about the physicians not being taught about nutrition. Well, we have nutritionists and dietitians who have now specialized to fill that gap. And so I think we're seeing that in cannabis too, where physicians that have gone through these programs or have done their own educating of themselves or filling in that gap of becoming endocannabinoidologists
Right, right.
and really long words like that. But yeah, there's so much responsibility put on the consumer that they're not taught or know that they should be taught about themselves and just expect their physicians or whoever they're going to for health advice to inform them of those things. And that's definitely not the case because they likely know as much as you.
And that's what's so important, honestly, coming back to the regulators, like what, for me, I have a special place in my heart for regulators. I know it is like the hardest job, but I have no interest in creating bifurcated medicine in the future. Like I like the
Mhm.
habit, the two Americas, right? Those who have and have not, right? And right now, for the most part, cannabis is for people who can afford it, right?
Mhm.
And so when we look at, things like nutritionalists, like you mentioned, like these special fields of study, sometimes those are separated out from people who can afford to talk to a nutritionalist, right? Or it's like,
Mhm.
look at our food supply, right? People who can afford to go to Whole Foods versus,
Mhm.
kind of being forced to take whatever, whatever produce
Right.
is there, right? And so I really see the role of regulators of sort of integrating this information into our systems so that we will get to a point where these doctor visits or these medical professional visits are covered by insurance, right? That that there's reimbursements or, their medicine will be covered by their current insurance. And there's no way we can do that unless we are doing this alongside society, that we're actually integrating this work in. And so I just want to also say thank you, because I know it's not easy, but literally that's what regulators are doing. You're taking the sort of all this information and making it work. And unfortunately are the people that are most visible to the angry public. So thank you for all accounts. And I could talk to you forever. I know I need to let you enjoy the rest of your Saturday. But are there any final thoughts you want to leave folks with?
I guess, we're talking about women who crush, right? This is the Women's History Month podcast series, and I want to, I think I want to, what do I want to say? What's coming to mind is, the cannabis plant that produces buds is a female plant, right? It draws a lot of feminine energy, and it requires that like care and attention, and, it can be moody, right? If it's not getting what it needs, And so I think my message is coming back to the plant side of it, because I unfortunately am separated from that with my current position. But I guess the advice I want to give is to anyone who is working directly with the cannabis plant, if they're touching the plant, if they're, touching the buds, remember to approach it with care and compassion, and just focus on the purpose of its use, and who's going to be consuming it at the end. Because if you start with something good, you're going to end with something great. So I think that's what I'd like to share.
I love that. I love intentional farming. I love it.
Yeah.